Hello. Okay, The Watched, or The Watchers. Over in the States, this movie is titled The Watchers, but over here in the UK, it's titled The Watched. It's based on a 2022 novel, and it's a supernatural horror that is directed by Ishana Shyamalan. It's a directorial debut, and just in case you don't recognize the name, she is the daughter of M. Night Shyamalan. So the synopsis of the movie is, we follow a young artist who gets stranded in an extensive forest in Western Ireland, where after finding shelter, she becomes trapped alongside three strangers, stalked by mysterious creatures each night. And with this being directed by the daughter of M. Night Shyamalan, I mean, she grew up on set with her father. There's clearly going to be some inspiration there from her father's directing style. And yes, I was expecting something quite similar to an M. Night Shyamalan movie. And from the way in which this film is structured and how the story is told and its pacing, it has a very much an M. Night Shyamalan vibe about it. So in many ways, perhaps it lacks sort of, Ishana Night Shyamalan kind of in many ways. Perhaps her unique own style and her own stamp just didn't quite come through you. But you could clearly see she is the daughter of M. Night Shyamalan because she's clearly inspired by sort of her father's directing style. What I will say is there is some really nice choices when it comes to how the camera is utilised and used throughout the movie, especially within the first act. The first act of this movie is actually the strongest. But yeah, just from a visual perspective and how the camera is used and how the story is told through visuals. There's this one moment where she places the camera inside of a bird cage, and it's a very brief moment, but it's moments like that I found very creative, very imaginative, and said so much without saying anything. And along with this very first act, got me quite excited for this movie, this experience, because it's the first act that really does a good job at immersing you into this story and into this world. Alongside the performances, like Dakota Fanning as our lead character here, this woman who's sort of in many ways still grieving over the loss of her mother, and she's got this estranged relationship with her twin sister. Again, so much is said through her performance, sort of through those kind of very small sort of nuanced details, through her expressions and just how she holds herself, along with the writing as well. I felt like, especially in the first act, I'm always going to keep going back to the first act here because I felt like that's when the movie was at its strongest in regards to every element, from the writing, from how the story sort of progressed. You do get a sort of a brief glimpse into the history of Dakota Fanning's character and what it is she's gone through, which again then sort of gets you set up on this journey, and you're there. I was compelled, I was intrigued, and a lot of it again is just down to how the character was brought to life through her performance, along with the writing and sort of just how the story was set up within the first act of the movie. And what they also do a really good job at doing is really giving this movie sort of aesthetically, giving this movie that kind of very British folklore feel about it. That kind of very sort of fairy tale kind of like goblins down at the bottom, at the bottom of the garden kind of thing vibe, and fairies and all of that. It's kind of really done very well through how the film aesthetically looks, through the cinematography, from how it's shot. And yeah, I think they did a really good job at capturing that vibe, which obviously this story really kind of needs, sort of what it is the story is telling. But it's also not too fairy tale, it's not too fantastical. It is still very much grounded in sort of like this kind of very real and human story, which, is done through the character that Dakota Fanning is playing here. And so, the kind of the blend of those two elements here, I felt like, it got me excited. And at first, within the first act, it felt like this was going to be, it was promising. It was very promising, because I was liking how everything was somewhat coming together, and sort of just the look and feel of the movie. And so yeah, within the first act, I'd say for the first 40 minutes of this movie, this is, a great introduction to the characters, the world, and it's got this great momentum behind it, this energy, which, aesthetically, they do a really good job of capturing that kind of very grounded fairy tale feel about the movie, a very kind of British folklore vibe about this film, which I really liked. And you've got some really good tension, a build-up of tension. And it's not until we get into the forest and things start to escalate. Yes, you've probably guessed it. You know what I'm going to probably say anyway. The film falls apart. Like, literally within the second and third act, as the story escalates and evolves, unfortunately for me, everything just started to fall apart, and it becomes quite a messy experience, quite a jarring experience. You've got characters saying things that don't feel natural or earned. You've got characters doing things that don't feel earned and just don't feel natural, and it sort of comes across very messy in its editing and how the second and third act are structured narratively. So yeah, even though it's got that M. Night Shyamalan sort of structure to it in many ways, I don't feel like Ishana Night Shyamalan sort of really kind of holds it together. And so when you get this kind of big third act, which is supposed to be epic, it's supposed to be emotionally powerful, it ends up falling really, really flat, which is unfortunate, because I could see the potential there. All the potential is there, for this to have been a really solid, compelling and emotional journey. But it's because of how this story and how the narrative works through the second and third act for me, and sort of how these characters interact and how their stories are told, along with the writing, which I found surprising, because again, like, the writing came across quite strong to me within the first act, but it's like every element of this movie, as the story unravels, every other element of how this movie is crafted also unravels. What I will say is the movie does retain that kind of very fairy tale, British folklore vibe throughout. And so as a result, as much as this film kind of fell apart for me, and I'll say it even in places kind of dragged, I was still always intrigued and compelled by what it was that was going on. I was compelled by these characters' journeys of, where potentially they were going to end up, and how these stories would sort of conclude. And so, even though I had a lot of issues with it, it didn't really completely throw me out. But I did at times struggle to sort of keep immersed due to sort of how messy and clanky everything became. There's still, when it comes to the horror, there is still moments of tension, which sort of gave me chills. And a lot of it was, again, down to how these certain moments would be executed due to sort of the choices with the camera and how a camera was utilised. And so there was still a lot to sort of admire from how the movie was made in moments. But it becomes a lot more sparse as the movie evolves into that second and third act. Like, there's this really creepy moment with these two characters under this shelter outside of the coop. And just from the way that scene plays out, it gave me chills. And it's like, through the use of lighting and shadows, it was frustrating because I was seeing the potential here. But yeah, it was moments like that that kind of kept me locked in. And even the third act, where you get the climax, like, you understand it's supposed to be quite a powerful and an emotional moment and an epic moment, but it still falls quite flat. It's very underwhelming. But there are pockets within these moments of potential, of something that is actually trying to work. Like, there are moments where I felt a chill due to what it was that was happening or what was being said during a moment. But then it's kind of like the conclusion or how that moment then ends up playing out, sort of, it amounts to nothing, and that kind of just sums up my overall experience here. Is this ended up being quite a flat and underwhelming experience, where I was intrigued due to sort of how a lot of the elements were sort of brought together and sort of how certain moments were crafted, but as one whole, it just doesn't really come together, and it ends up being quite messy. The score by a Abel Kojaneski. I think I've just literally butchered that name there, but the music within this movie was beautiful. Like, it was one of the strongest elements for me, which really sort of helped elevate that kind of very British folklore fairy tale vibe that I'm referring to here. And a lot of it's done through the use of violins, which also sort of play into the horror elements and sort of really elevate the horror and tension in moments. I absolutely adored the score within this movie by a Abel again, I can't pronounce the name, apologies, but yeah, a great score. And I also just want to touch on the CGI. I do feel like there was an overuse of CGI within this movie that was very ropey. Again, it's one of those movies where I feel like you can get away with using practical, and I felt like a lot of the moments within this movie would have benefited from practical. But yeah, quite a mixed bag for me, a lot of potential, but unfortunately ended up being very flat and underwhelming. So they are my thoughts on The Watched, or The Watchers, and I will be giving The Watched a 5 out of 10. So yeah, they are my thoughts on The Watched, but what did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Then please let me know in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future movie reviews from just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. My next review will be for, well, I got 2 reviews planned. One for Nicolas Cage's new movie that drops this weekend, and that's Arcadian. I'm really looking forward to that. And you've also got Disney's and Pixar's Inside Out 2. I do kind of want to squeeze in Bad Boys, Ride or Die. I'm hearing a lot of positive things about that movie, but I've not, I know you're going to find it shocking, I've never seen the previous 3 movies, not even the first, which I was surprised was released back in 1995. Now, I remember it coming out very clearly, but I completely forgot that that movie was that old. But yeah, if you want me to review Bad Boys, Ride or Die, let me know in the comments below. Maybe I'll get a poll going. But at the moment, it's definitely going to be our new releases for the weekend, and that is Arcadian and Inside Out 2. So yeah, enough rambling. Thank you again for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll be catching you guys soon.